Friday is a popular time for class. All right, let's get started. For those of you that don't know me, I am Sarah Velasquez. I am the Communications Core Director for the K-INBRE. And we have the seminar every month, except for December and January. They are recorded and we will post them on our website if you ever miss one, or if one of your students asks to see one. And please remember that we have social media that you could follow. And I think I'm going to hand it off to our speaker. And if you would kindly turn on your cameras, if you are able, that would be great for us to see your beautiful faces. There you go. And I'll let our speaker introduce herself.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon. I was about to say good morning too. I think you gave that to me. It's probably morning somewhere. It's just not morning where any of us are. My name is Laura Lessard, and I'm happy to be with you today. I am the program coordinator for Delaware INBRE. Has anybody ever been to Delaware? I'm kind of curious. Yeah? Awesome. Well, Delaware is a lovely state. I don't know what we have here that's lovely. We have beaches, which are pretty great. So we have a UD Blue Hen alum on here. That's very exciting. I got to see that. So I'm the program coordinator for Delaware INBRE, and I'm also a faculty member at the University of Delaware in the Department of Behavioral Health and Nutrition. And I was happy to insert myself into your seminar series, and Sarah was asking for volunteers to share a little bit about how to get better at receiving feedback. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, what that means in a second. So a little bit more about me and why I might be even vaguely remotely qualified to talk to you today. So I'm trained in public health, and I always mention my training when I talk to students because I don't know, in Delaware, we don't have a public health school and people don't know about public health. So I always say, like, I love public health. I'm trained in public health, and I'm always happy to talk about public health with anyone, including your students out there in Kansas. So I have a master's in public health and my doctoral training also in public health. And I'm a faculty member in a department where I teach epidemiology, actually, which I used to have to explain to people what epidemiology was, and now I don't, which is like one of a few silver linings of this pandemic, is you all know what epidemiology is. So that's cool. And I'm serving as interim program coordinator for Delaware INBRE as we transition to a new PI. My regular Delaware INBRE job is as evaluation director, and Sarah and I have worked together on several projects because she's an awesome collaborator. Okay, so I want to talk about three things. I want us to talk about three things. First, what feedback is and when we receive it. The second is why we should think about how we receive feedback. So maybe some of you have been to a workshop or read a thing about how to give feedback and how to be better about giving feedback. And that's great. And you should absolutely take advantage of that in any professional development thing you might be offered. But this is not going to be about that. This is going to be about receiving feedback. And so then I'm going to share a little bit about how we can get more out of the feedback that we receive. I shamelessly steal everything I'm going to say today and all of the content from this particular book called Thanks for the Feedback. It's an awesome book, and I strongly encourage you to read it someday. I've read it about 15 times and I still haven't gotten it all. But it's been very impactful to me. So I strongly suggest reading it. I have some quotes in here that are from the book, and definitely not my own thoughts. I have taught a workshop on this book for our undergraduate students in our summer program for the past 4 years, and have used it in my own teaching with undergraduate and graduate students. Led a book club for the University of Delaware faculty last year on this book, and also taught workshops on this book. So I'm like a very passionate fan club member of this particular work. So I always talk about tech when I'm doing Zoom. So I'm going to use the chat in a second. Sarah's going to help me with the breakout rooms in a little bit. And then I have a handout, and it's a Google file. And oh, that's just to Sarah. That's not going to help. let me send that to everyone. So that's a Google file for those of you. I'm seeing that some of you are in a shared space, so I'm not sure if you'd be able to have access to that link as easily as if you had your own screen. But it has that shared file has a link to article and some other materials, and also a couple discussion points I want to use today. Okay, so I want to do a brief introduction just so that I can get a sense of where people are at, and there's 21 people on here. So we don't have time to go around, but I think there are some people here who are students, undergraduate students attending the seminar. If those of you that are want to share, introduce yourself briefly. And I'm actually particularly interested in just a few people sharing the kind of research work that they're involved in right now, just very, very briefly, if anyone's willing.
I can go ahead and go. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
All right, my name is Cole King. I attend Kansas State University, and I do research in behavioral neuroscience, especially in regards to development.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else want to share their work? Not today. That's all right. I understand many students have class right now, and on Thursday during your regular time, I am teaching class. So I appreciate Sarah's flexibility with scheduling this. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about when we receive feedback. So I find it helpful when I'm thinking about receiving feedback to think about specific feedback moments in our life, like ideally recent life, maybe even today, maybe even this morning, maybe even right before you got on here. But let's, for those of you that are able with your text situations, if people want to put in the chat box, some examples of when we receive feedback. And I'll put one in here because I'm a faculty member. So I'm going to put course evaluations from students. That's a feedback moment for me in my life. What are some other just generic feedback moments that we have in our lives? Let's see what examples we get there. Yeah, all the faculty with us are putting our science peer review process on manuscripts. Sarah shared about poster sessions. Yeah, people come by and ask you questions about your poster or your work, and that's certainly a feedback moment. Maybe they have questions about the way you're doing your research. Certainly, your grades is a great example. And actually, in a few minutes, I'm going to introduce a little bit of terminology that they use in the book about types of feedback. But evaluative feedback, or feedback that helps you understand where your standing is one piece of important feedback. Yes, those student evaluations, all of us some of us live and die by that. Great, so these are all great examples to kind of start to get your, oh, of course, I hate it when I put animation in my slides and then forget. So there's a lot of moments, right? So most of the examples we saw in oh, it's funny, the negative feedback from the kids when I cook, that's my usual example that I use about at home when like I make something and the kids don't eat it. So whoever put that in there stole my usual example for that, right? So at school where we're students or where we're working, certainly we saw some moments about that. At home or in your personal or family life, certainly from a roommate or a significant other. At work, whether you work on campus or have other jobs. And then in the lab or your research environment. Now, I understand there's like great diversity in terms of the types of research lab. So I use the word lab loosely. I'm a public health person. So when students work with me on my research, there's no like lab, but I can just pretend for today we'll use that, right? So I like to say feedback is everywhere in all of these places. And so hopefully now that we've kind of opened up your mind to the possibilities, on the handout that hopefully most of you were able to click on, it's going to ask you, and I think I might skip the breakout room thing, Sarah, because I'm thinking that probably won't logistically work with the people who are here. But as I mentioned, I find it really helpful to think about a few specific pieces of feedback that you've received And that way in your mind, as you're listening and participating today, you can kind of apply it to those situations. So if you're able to look at the handout, at the end of the handout, there's two kind of questions. And I'm not collecting this or anything, but just for you to think about a time that a piece of feedback brought out a strong positive reaction in you. And then the other one is a time in the recent past, more recent the better, that a piece of feedback brought a strong negative reaction in you. So I'll just give everybody like a minute to just think about those moments and just jot a couple things down so you can remember. Again, this is to help this content be a little bit stickier, if you will, in your life. So I'm going to watch the clock and give you a minute. And I just put the questions in the chat in case that's easier for people if you're not able to see the Google Doc questions at the end there. All right, so hopefully you were able to just for yourself, just write down some of the details about that. And again, to keep that in your mind as we continue moving forward. I said the second sort of thing I want to talk about today beyond sort of what is feedback is why it's important to focus on receiving feedback. So this is a quote from the book, which says, "Exceptional teachers and mentors are rare. Mostly our lives are populated by everybody else. People who are doing their best but may not know better, who are too busy to give us the time we need, who are difficult themselves, or who are just plain lousy at giving feedback," right? And they make the case in this book that we have to get good at learning from just about everyone. And you can see in this quote, some of the reasons why feedback experiences aren't great is just like something about the other individual or even just the moment they're in. Maybe they're the greatest feedback giver regularly, but maybe they didn't sleep last night, they've got a grant due tomorrow, they're just passing you in the hall, whatever it is. And so even people who are exceptionally good feedback givers can have a moment or two where they're not, exceptional feedback givers in that. And so the opportunity of the tools that are in this book that I'll talk about today are to take a little bit of that control back from people. I'll talk about that more in a second. So I would argue that any feedback situation can teach you something if you try. If you look at every feedback opportunity as a potential learning opportunity, right? So there's another story in the book that I'll read for you that says there is an old joke about a happy optimist, a child who's a happy optimist whose parents are trying to teach him to see the world more realistically. So they decide to give him a sack of horse poop for his birthday. Side note on that, I've read this story once and someone was like, "I have a horse farm in case anybody wants horse poop." And I was like, okay, great, thanks for that. Okay, so parents give this child a sack of horse poop for his birthday. And so the grandmother says, "What did they get you?" And the child says, "I don't know." And he's like digging through the bag and he says, "But I think there might be a pony in here somewhere." So I love that. I didn't make that story up. That story is in the book. But the idea of that approach to feedback, which is like, this really is like actually a bag of poop, but there could be something in there, right? Worthwhile. So that child's idea of like, if there, there's got to be something good in here. And so, feedback can be like that sometimes, right? It's not always pleasant, but you might get a pony if you dig enough. So in the handout, what I've done, so the book is long, but what I've done is take 3 things out of the book that I'm going to talk about. And these are 3 things that I think all of us could try today or tonight or tomorrow. And there's like 12 other things in the book, and it's a lot more complicated. But these are just like little nuggets of things that I think might, help you today. Sort towards coaching, unpacking feedback, and asking for just one thing. So these are the 3 that are on the handout. And this is some of the reading on the handout. So I'll, given that some people are in larger rooms, when I used to do this in person, I used to have people actually read out loud. Imagine that. Okay, so in the sort towards coaching section, it says some feedback is evaluative. And that's something that you mentioned, some of you mentioned in the chat, right? So like the grades in a class or student evaluations. Some is coaching, right? Here's how you can improve. Coaching feedback is feedback where the whole goal of the giver is to improve you, the receiver, right? They're coaching you. Think about it, obviously, a coach in any sort of sports environment is like easy to think about, right? That role of a coach, like there's nothing in it for them, right? The only thing that's in it is for you to get better, you the player, you the receiver, right? So coaching where it's completely for you to get better. And this excerpt says everyone needs both. Evaluation tells you where you stand, what to expect and what is expected of you, and coaching helps you improve, right? And learn. And helps you play at a larger level. So as you're looking back at your notes on what the strong positive, strong negative reaction, kind of look back at that briefly now and kind of see like, was any of that evaluation or coaching, right? And it sometimes is the case that people's negative reaction was evaluation and their positive reaction was coaching, or maybe not. Maybe, you got really great grades and maybe your positive was evaluation. So maybe kind of take a look at that and see like whether it falls into that evaluation or that coaching bucket. Give you a little practice on that. Okay, so this is the next thing in that section. So it's not always easy. They say it's not always easy to distinguish one from the other, right? And there's a story in here, which I'm not going to read, about that. There's tons of stories and examples in this book. But the point that they're making is that sometimes when you walk into a feedback moment, or you just like find yourself in a feedback moment, like the ones you wrote about, you're not kind of exactly sure what the person's purpose is, because usually feedback doesn't arrive to you. It's like, they don't say, I am now going to deliver you evaluation, right? I am now going to deliver coaching. And even more so in an individual moment where you're giving feedback, it's sometimes a blend, right? So say the postdoc in your lab or faculty member that you're working with gives you feedback on your lab technique, right? It's probably a little bit of both, right? Because they're telling you kind of whether your lab technique is at the level it needs to be for the lab, and they're a great mentor. They're probably also trying to coach you to, even if your technique is good, to get, to improve, right? So an individual feedback moment can actually be both. So it can be difficult to distinguish while you're in the moment. So down at the bottom of this quote, they talk about this tip of sort towards coaching. So I say, just treat everything like coaching. Sort in your mind towards coaching. Look at it as if it's coaching and not evaluation or the other kinds of feedback that it could be, right? And so they say to work to see feedback as potentially, emphasis on potentially, valuable feedback, right? So one of the things that I like about this approach is that you take control back from a conversation. Sometimes it feels a little bit like feedback happens to you, right? Like you just, there you were, just like in your lab, unassuming, and then just like someone just dropped some feedback in your lap, right? Or you just open your email or your text and there's your feedback right there, right? And it feels very much like something that happens to you. And I find that this particular technique or idea, along with the other two, allow you to get some control back in that environment. It doesn't feel like it's happening to you, right? You have control over how you're going to think about it and look at it. And so this is one of those things. We're going to just assume the person is coaching. We're going to sort towards coaching. We're going to look at it as if it's coaching, right? Coaching is that idea where the person giving you the feedback, all they want is for you to improve. There's nothing in it for them, right? Of course, sometimes, that's not really their intent. Like my kid's not eating the food that I make for them, right? They're not really trying to coach me to make the mac and cheese every night, right? They don't like whatever it is that I've made them. So it's about seeing it. It's about sorting it that way and thinking about it as if it's coaching and not anything else. So that's tip one. The second tip is to unpack the feedback, right? So that is the idea of understanding exactly what the person is trying to tell you. And the second part of it is separating the understanding of what they said from the doing anything about it, right? So sometimes we think about if we think that if we were to listen and were to ask questions about the feedback, that we have to take it. But that's an indication that we're going to do whatever the person tells us to do. Like I'm going to make mac and cheese for my kids every night, right? That's not at all what this is. This is about separating the feedback itself and your full understanding of the feedback from doing anything about it. So in the book, they talk about that it's important to pay attention to words and phrases like be assertive that have a vague meaning or have a subjective meaning, right? So your mentor might ask you to be more independent. I don't know if everyone's ever heard that from a colleague, like you need you to be more independent or more dependable, right? Well, what does it mean to be independent for that person? What does it mean to be dependable for that person, right? Maybe that person wants you to be dependable by being available 24/7, being able to come into the lab on a moment's notice to, I don't know, I'm a public health person, so whatever it is you guys do in the lab with the test tubes and all that stuff, or the animals or whatever it is, right? So maybe their sense is they're trying to tell you you need to be dependable, and what they mean is you need to be there 24/7. And you're like, okay, great, except I'm not going to do that because that's not the kind of person, like I want to work-life balance or I have other commitments or things like that, right? So they say I want you to be more dependable. Asking questions about what more dependable looks like is a really important step in deciding whether you want to be more dependable or whether you agree with that person's assessment of dependable. And again, so it's two pieces. It's understanding it and separating understanding it from doing anything about it. So I'm wondering if any of the students that are with us would do a brief little role play with me for a second, which might be funny because I've not done this workshop with faculty and students on it before. So usually we'll see how this plays out. Is there any student on here that is willing to do a little role play where you just pretend to be a student? It'll be really easy, and I'll pretend to be a professor, which will be really easy for me.
I'll volunteer.
Excellent. I hear a voice, but I don't see a person.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't turn on my camera right now.
Oh, that's okay. I don't need to look at you. You can look at me. Okay, so here's a role play. Can you tell me your name?
Hi, my name is Jacob.
Hey, Jacob. So let's, I want you to think about your least favorite class from the spring, like the class you liked the least. Did you think of what it is? Okay, so, all right, so you're thinking about your least favorite class from the spring. So pretend I was the teacher of that class. I don't even need to know what it is. In fact, don't tell me what the class is because maybe it was taught by someone on here or someone that might watch this. Okay, so you're thinking about the class. I'm the instructor of the class. Can you tell me how can I improve the class?
With or without hurting feelings?
No, you're just telling me this is me showing you something. This isn't me judging your giving of feedback. We're showing my receipt here. So just tell it like it is. Tell me how I can improve the class.
Improving the class would include adding in examples for what you believe is necessary for given assignments, as well as being more available for understanding those assignments or giving feedback when necessary instead of giving grades, which are treated as feedback.
So when you say be more available, what would it be like? What would it look like if I was more available? Can you give me some examples of other professors who you think are more available?
Yeah, one professor would probably be so-and-so. They're able to really work with me on understanding certain expectations on certain examples of assignments, whereas what you give is my grade is dependent upon the assignments that we're being graded on without examples.
Okay. So it sounds like you'd like me to be more available, maybe on email or maybe on Zoom or in person, depending on if that's safe. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
And then in terms of the assignments, so how could I do a better job at providing information about how they're going to be graded? What are some ideas you have on that?
Previous students that you've found did exceptionally well with the assignment given based on the expectations that were provided by you.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Jacob. That was a perfect illustration, right? Thank you so much for that. So what I'm demonstrating there with no, practice, and thank you to Jacob for being a great sport, is he said a couple words in there that I didn't exactly know what he meant, right? And that makes perfect sense, right? He said, be more available. And I wasn't sure what that meant. Did that mean on email? Did that mean in person? Did that mean on the phone? Did that mean whatever it was, right? So in that moment, I was unpacking the feedback that he was giving me by asking more questions about what it meant by being more available. It's funny, last time I did this, this is only the second time I've done this little role play, and the student had shockingly the same exact comments. So this is this thing all of us faculty should pay attention to. So asking more about what it would mean to be more available, asking more about what it would mean to provide that guidance. And then, one of the things he suggested was to provide, previous students' assignments, right, as a clear guideline of what high quality looks like. And so with this skill, I am not saying I'm going to do any of that. Maybe I'm going to be the same amount available. Maybe I'm not going to give the future students that. But what I'm doing is unpacking it so that I understand what I would have to do if I wanted to follow it, right? So if you want to follow the advice, would you know how to do it, right? And oftentimes in feedback situations, you actually don't walk away with that blue fit question answered, right? You actually don't walk away. Like if I hadn't followed up with questions, and of course I would follow up with more details with him if this were a real feedback conversation. You can imagine how awesome my students when they come to me with feedback. But I love feedback, so there's that. But having this in mind, where when you walk away from that moment, you need to know everything that you could to be able to take the feedback. How would I be more available? How would I provide more clear guidance, right? How would I do all of those things, right? So it's important to unpack it such that you have the opportunity to do something about it, right? As opposed to just making making assumptions. And you know what they say about that, about what that person might have meant, right? And again, this is two pieces. The first is the understanding, and completely separate from the understanding is the doing absolutely anything about it, right? So in the unpacking the luggage metaphor, right? It just means you're carefully taking every item out of that suitcase. You're laying it all out, and you're like, oh, that's a cute shirt. Oh, those shoes are cute. That might go with the thing I have. You lay it all out, and then you try it on, and you're like, actually, no, that is not my color. I thought that would match the dress, and it absolutely doesn't. I thought those shorts would fit me. They don't, right? So it's about unpacking it, looking at it, and then deciding what to do with it, and deciding what to do with each individual part of it, and not to think about taking or leaving an entire, feedback moment, right? So we don't want to take or leave everything. Oftentimes, there's a tiny little thing in an otherwise bag of horse poop, right? Even in the most horrible feedback scenario, like a loud fight you have with a roommate, you might be able to find something in there that makes sense, something you could try, something that you could work on. And so you don't need to, again, we're unpacking it, not so we can try, not even so that we can keep everything or even try everything on, right? So we're unpacking it so that we can understand it better and make a more educated decision. Okay, so the third thing on there, and I think this is potentially the thing we could all do today. Maybe I'll try this out later today. I use do frequently, right? So ask for just one thing, right? So, and maybe this is consistent with your experiences that you wrote about or thought about earlier on the workshop, right? Which is, there was something about the timing of the feedback. Like maybe your strong negative reaction was because you had, a grant rejection, a paper rejection, you got a bad grade on a paper, and then your roommate came to you to complain about how you park in the driveway wrong, right? So at the end of that day, you were like not in a position to hear about your parking or something else. And never have this idea where you're like, another thing, like you have an outsized reaction to something because it's followed a day where things haven't gone your way. Or maybe you're a person that needs a lot of sleep and didn't sleep well the last night. And then first thing you go to the lab that morning and, they're in on it with you, right? So feedback is less likely to set off triggers. And this is a lingo from the book, but less likely to have a bad reaction to you if you request it and direct it. So asking for just one thing is about thinking about moments where you're in a really awesome headspace to receive feedback. You had a good night's sleep, you just got an A on a paper, you're in a learning mode, you're ready to learn something. In that moment, when you're in that headspace, that's an opportunity to go to a person who can potentially give you feedback, another classmate in your lab, a grad student, a postdoc, a faculty member, whatever it is, and say, I'm wondering if you could help, do you have any ideas on how I can improve this really specific thing, my writing this, or my statistical analysis on this, or my pipetting, or whatever it is in your particular lab, right? One specific thing. So they say not to go into those conversations with big unfocused questions like, do you have anything feedback for me? Or tell me everything I'm doing wrong. Because oftentimes when you open yourself up like that, people come back with things you were not expecting. Like you were expecting they were going to say something about your pipetting, but then all they talked about was how you're always late. And you were like, not ready for that, always late feedback, right? So asking for just one thing, asking for just one specific thing at the time and the place and in the way that you are ready to receive it. And hopefully looking back at the two feedback experiences that you wrote about earlier, you can see something about that might help you understand what your triggers are, right? So you look at the negative and it's like, someone wrote you this horrible email, and you look at the positive and it was something about an in-person or a face-to-face reaction. So someone wrote in the chat that face-to-face versus verbal, and actually have a little side note and a couple of slides about how challenging this has been to do virtually. Maybe you can learn something about your own tendencies and say, generally it's better for me if it's in text, because then I don't have to look people in the eyes, or maybe it's better, things like that. So pay attention to your tendencies. And then, when you're in a good tendencies moment, ask for just one thing. So I like to practice this, and I think this is possible. I think Sarah's got the settings such that if you go in the chat box where it says to everyone, change it to me, to Laura Lessard. So only I'm going to see it, not everybody else. So do that first. And then if you want to, I don't know you and I will follow up on you, but just, to try it out, answer this question or fill in the rest of the sentence for yourself. It would be the most helpful for your progress on your project, or whatever it is that you're doing here. If I received guidance and feedback on one specific thing. So change your chat to me, so only I will see it. I think you can do that, because I was chatting with Sarah. What is the one thing? I'm not going to read them or anything. We're just going to do this for fun. See if anybody has some ideas. These are good. I'm not going to tell anybody what they are, but they're great. Some of them are about skills in a lab environment, like how to do something that's unique to that. In fact, the person wrote in parentheses a translation of what the thing was, since I'm not going to know what it was. And then other people are writing more, what you might say, office skills or professional skills, time management, how to request recommendations. That's something that that students often ask about. And other people are writing things about their content knowledge. So there's a lot of, you can see, this is great, a great variety of things. Let's read these last couple. Awesome, great. Yeah, so there can be a lot of different areas for this, like a specific technique in the lab, a professional skill. It would be most helpful if I could get progress on my personal statement for my grad school application, or what I can do to get in a better position to apply to medical school, right? or speaking up more in meetings, or contributing more to papers, or things like that, right? So I encourage you to think about moments where, again, the first step of this is a time when you're ready, right? A time when you're in a great mental space. I have a colleague who, this is a great undergrad example, but I have a colleague who will only read her course evaluations with a glass of wine, and she has to have someone read them to her. She can't look at them on paper. She has a thing. She can't look at them on the screen. Someone reads them to her while she drinks a glass of wine. This is just her technique. And that's because she's learned that if she received the feedback in that way, she can actually hear it at the size that it is, at the scale that it is, as opposed to it seeming really overwhelming when it's written down. That's just for her. That's just like what she's learned. And through learning that about herself, and through you thinking about yourself and your own tendencies, you can really learn and grow a lot more in these like controlled environments. So I think that is that thing. So a couple of people have mentioned in the chat and in the context of answering that, but also throughout this, around the difference between face-to-face and not. So I have I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and I've learned about myself during COVID. I'm incredibly risk averse. So I don't go anywhere. I don't do anything in person. Here in Delaware, we're very stringent. We have a vaccine mandate. We have a mask mandate. I still don't go anywhere in person. I'm here in my home. I never go anywhere. So I'm always giving feedback to students on Zoom. And I've learned through that a little bit about how feedback interactions work differently. But does anyone want to share thoughts about how this sort of remote thing makes this more complicated or easier, or experiences about that? It sounds like a couple of people had some thoughts on this earlier on as well.
I can say, as a recent graduate with my PhD, that meeting in person made me more nervous because I don't know, it felt kind of trapped sometimes. Like if you're sitting in the office with somebody, even though, I can see them the same and everything over Zoom, being like physically in the room with them made me feel more like nervous of the whole situation. Like I was kind of like trapped in the situation. Yeah. And harder to escape, I guess. And like afterwards you have to have like the pleasantries or whatever, instead of going in my own room and crying or something.
Poor Sarah. She's learning something about her tendencies. A couple of people wrote in the chat that tone is tricky on email and worse on text. And I think that something like, I feel incredibly old about all technology, and I'm not old, but I just feel old about technology. But people feel differently about the sort of personal factor with text versus email versus in person. I think that really is tricky, and something that both Christine and the folks in the room at KSU are bringing up is the difficulty in understanding tone, right? When you don't hear someone's voice. So in written email or written in text. And so I think, maybe even more so a good idea to do the first two things, right? So the sort towards coaching, right? You can't know the tone in a text. Just assume it's like a super coaching tone. Like assume like, the why didn't you turn the thing over at 12 like you were supposed to text is like genuinely helpful, forward-looking coaching, right? I always say sort towards coaching. When in doubt, just assume it's coaching, even when you know it's not. Just sort it there, because your ability to understand it and walk away from that scenario feeling, like you didn't just get beat down is so much greater. And again, that's the control that you can have over that. And also someone else is identifying in the chat that that tone is not universally understandable to people, right? So it's like my poor father, I always use him as example, but my dad's tone, I don't know. For me, I feel like it can use a little work. It feels very strong to me. Like I'd like him to be a little bit more, his tone to be a little bit less judgy with like everything. But he doesn't hear himself judgy, right? He hears himself coaching me. He hears himself trying to, help me be a better mom and a better worker and a better person fixing things around my house, right? So tone is another thing that's tricky. And so sometimes I find that in written communication, it's actually easier because I can just pretend the tone is coaching, right? I don't have to hear it and think it's not coaching, right? So Letitia put a comment in the chat, right, that people ascribe personal experiences to tone that writers often don't intend. And it's important to consider their perspective, right, when reading texts. And again, to follow up in a manner that works for you, whether that be text or email or in a face-to-face conversation, in a way that where you can unpack it. And again, separating unpacking from doing anything about that. So I don't know. I think that online conversations, certainly they were around before COVID and will continue. So I encourage you to think about how you can, again, this is focused on receiving feedback, but be a better feedback receiver when things are written down, and maybe that somebody reads it to you out loud. Okay, that's kind of all I had, ish. So feedback is everywhere. And I am a program evaluator by love and passion and do a lot of program evaluation. So I recognize I'm an unusual person when it comes to feedback, but I love feedback. I love student feedback. I love workshop feedback. I love like one-of-a-kind, one-off emails that people send you like, oh, great presentation, hint, hint. Or other pieces of feedback that people give me. I love that. And the book talks about this growth identity, but just the sense that you see your life as something that can always be done better. This idea of an identity that isn't fixed, but is predicated upon growth and change and learning. And if you see your goal as growth and change and learning, then you can see feedback as potentially helpful. Again, really emphasis on potential. It doesn't mean it's always helpful, but you can't see the helpful pieces of it sometimes when it's wrapped up in something that feels really negative. So to get that control back, I suggest these 3 things to try, and then more if you want to read the book, which is sort towards coaching. So assume the person is coaching you, even if you kind of know they're not. Unpacking it and separating the understanding from the doing absolutely anything about it. And then the third thing is to ask for just one thing, and to ask for one specific thing at a time and place and in a manner that that you're in the best possible position to learn and grow from it. So that's all I have, I think, unless people have questions or thoughts.
I wanted to add, if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to add like the importance of kind of explaining ahead to the student as a teacher to students the expectations or what we mean by giving feedback. Let's say at the beginning of the semester, okay, that's usually what I do. I write or tell them in class what the feedback is going to be on and how it should be used, and so they can access a couple of points on what I will expect from them, but also what I will say and what I will not say. So, do not take anything personally. I'm usually very straight to the point. I tend not to say too much about the great thing that you will write, but more about what could be improved and those kind of stuff. So I think, especially as teacher and faculty, like it's really important to kind of prepare students to the type or the style of feedback that we're willing to provide them, and say that early enough so that they don't get overwhelmed or offended by anything they may hear or read later. Some kind of like guideline.
Yeah, and also, I mean, again, I realize I'm a weird person, but I would add to that, as you faculty people can be a feedback receiver too, right? So I ask, asking students that work with you, again, not just in general, like, how can I be a better mentor to you, right? Because first of all, students won't give you an honest answer to that. And also, again, that's like opening yourself up. But to say, maybe in the middle or at the end of students working with you, like, was it helpful that I provided that guidance at the beginning? Was there something else I could have done ahead of time to help you be more prepared for the expectations of our lab, right? So I think it's amazing. I mean, Jacob's example, I think that's a challenge that students have with teaching all the time, is students not understanding what the expectations are. So, I mean, I've learned in my own 10-ish years of teaching now that's like rule number 1, always do the expectations. But if you want to go like next level on top of that, is maybe choose that as your feedback, as your one thing that you ask of your students, right? How could I do, you know, that's something that's obviously important to you, and you've found when you're in your experience that's setting them up for success. And sometimes when you ask people for feedback like that, they'll be like, no, that was great. No one ever did that before. It's awesome. And then you're like, awesome, I should keep doing it, right? So even asking a question like that where you're pretty sure they're going to say, no, it's awesome. I love ice cream for lunch every day. Are you kidding me? Who doesn't love ice cream every day, right? That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask it. I think it's great to check in, and maybe some people are lactose intolerant. You never know. Thank you for that. Other thoughts or comments?
Okay. If there are no other questions or thoughts or comments, then let's thank Laura for presenting to us today, and we appreciate you coming. Like I said, this was recorded and will be posted for later viewing if you would like to, or if your students would like to. And we appreciate you. We appreciate having other INBREs come and talk to us also, and you know, making those connections. So
you're welcome to Delaware anytime.
All righty. I will see y'all next month. Thank you.
Thank you.